Imagine waking up to explosions in Los Angeles, New York under siege, and hypersonic missiles raining down on Washington, D.C. Sounds impossible, right? Well, let me show you. A scenario, not fiction, but a blueprint Russia has already used against its neighbors. What if the United States was next? Chapter 1. It starts with a lie. Russia's playbook always starts with rewriting history. They'd claim the United States never truly existed, that it was a self-proclaimed nation built on stolen land. They'd call it the Washington regime, let's say, and argue that the United States Declaration of Independence was illegal document. Sounds absurd. That's exactly what they said about Ukraine and its independence in 1991, calling it an artificial creation of the USSR. Next, they dig into old wounds. They'd say, the United States doesn't even have its own language. It's just a melting pot of cultures, none of which are truly American. It sounds far-fetched. Remember that Russia has called Ukrainian a dialect, denying it's a language at all. Chapter 2. Divide and destabilize. Step 2. South division. Russia would declare themselves protectors of Native American tribes, claiming they've been oppressed by the United States government for centuries. They'd funnel money into separatist movements, just like they did in Moldova, supporting the breakaway region of Transnistria, or in Georgia funding separatists in Abkhazia and South Ossetia. They'd weaponize grievances and inflame tensions, turning communities against each other. Suddenly, you'd see pro-Russian leaders emerging, promising independence and protection from the so-called tyranny of Washington. This is how they destabilized Chechnya, and later installed puppet leaders loyal to Moscow. Chapter 3. The Alaska invasion. Then comes the excuse for invasion. Russia would claim Alaska was never sold, it was only leased for 100 years, and the lease has expired. With a shared maritime border at the Diomede Islands, they'd send troops under restoring historical justice. This tactic mirrors what they did in Crimea in 2014, arguing it was always Russian territory and had to be returned. Russian forces would quickly move in, taking control of key infrastructure, while state media would call it a peaceful operation. And just like in Crimea, any resistance would be silenced as terrorist activity. Chapter 4. The final strike. Finally, Russia would frame the United States as a threat to global stability. They'd claim Washington was planning aggression against Russia and announced the launch of a special military operation. Hypersonic missiles would hit major cities under the pretext of demilitarizing the regime. This exact justification was used in Ukraine, bombing peaceful cities like Kiev, Kharkiv, and Mariupol. Russian troops would occupy parts of the United States, claiming they there to protect oppressed communities. Millions of families would be displaced, lives destroyed, and the country left in chaos. All of this under the promise of being peacemakers. This scenario might sound ridiculous, right? But let me remind you, it's exactly what Russia has done to its neighbors. Moldova, Georgia, Chechnya, Ukraine all have suffered under the same playbook. Millions of lives have been destroyed because of these tactics. I lived through it. On February 24, 2022, I woke up from explosions in city. Hypersonic missiles were flying over my city. Shrapnel was hitting buildings. And this shrapnel should have killed me. And I'm not sure why, but I'm here right now and telling you about my experience. Peaceful families like mine were forced to flee their homes. I've shared my experience of that first day of war, and I want to show you the human cost of these tactics. It's not just headlines, it's real lives, real pain. This is a dumb simulation, I know, but it worked for Russia in Moldova, Georgia, Chechnya, Ukraine, and if we don't stop them, who's to say the United States couldn't be next? Russia is knocking on doors. The question is, how will we respond? If you want to see what these tactics look like in real life, watch my story of the first day of the war in Ukraine. It's raw, it's personal, and it's the truth about what happens when Russia uses this playbook. Let's stand together against aggression and ensure this never becomes a reality for anyone else.